It's been a month. It's been a month, guys, since the last, or just over a month actually, since the last The Batman Part 2 discussion series video. So welcome back, Bat family, to another installment of what we all love to do here in this series, and that is just talk about all of it. The possibilities, the theories, based on information we have, some rumors that we could have, and just things that we know, and we like to nerd out, geek out together about Matt Reeves's The Batman universe. So today's episode, if you will, is more centered around the recent news with regards to that of Clayface possibly having some involvement in the Batman Part 2, or just in this Batman universe anyway. I think there's a couple of other questions that I've got in here, but if you want to nerd out about this Rogues Gallery villain, and also other ones like Hush and some other things that we've got to talk about today featuring your questions, sit back, relax, get yourself a coffee, and let's get right into it. Please like the video as well if you're enjoying this series. Let's get this video out there in the YouTube algorithm, and of course subscribe for more news, reviews, theory videos, breakdowns, just like this. So right away in today's video, I wanted to talk about Brutal Vengeance's question, and shout out to Brutal Vengeance, a huge supporter of the channel. He always shows up in the live streams, and it ultimately just supports me a lot, so thank you to him. But he asked a very interesting question that I did want to start right off the bat with. So he says, "Hey man, just wanted to touch on the Clayface rumors that have been going around. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the articles have said that, if the rumors are true by the way, Clayface will be the main villain of Part 2. So is there a possibility that Clayface could be a side villain, just like Oz from the first film? Hope you can answer. Thank you, man." So yeah, one thing I did want to just say right from the beginning is that the Deadline article, despite, a couple of weeks ago when this was all going down, a lot of news outlets or, Twitter, Instagram outlets were saying Clayface as the Batman 2 villain confirmed, but they do end it off by saying, "That said, other sources are telling us the scripts are constantly changing, that is with regards to the Batman 2 apparently. I don't know about that, and that Clayface is a big addition to Matt Reeves' The Batman 2, but this is the most important bit. Let's wait until the dust settles here and something moves forward. It remains," and double underline these words, "it remains to be seen whether Clayface is a connection between the Batman 2 Elseworld," so the Elseworld's Matt Reeves universe, or like Gunn and Safran's feature and series sprawling DC Gods and Monsters Chapter 1. So it's like he might not even really be a villain. But the thing about Clayface is that he has been rumored for a while. A major outlet here is reporting that Clayface could be involved in the Batman Part 2. We've had rumors since the Penguin series that possibly Basil Karlo could be involved, but nothing really came to fruition of that. But there are theories with how that character could be utilized and also bleed into the Batman 2, just like what we heard with that of the Penguin series setting up the Batman 2's main plot, which is certainly intriguing. But the main question here with regards to, it was never reported as a main villain, which is why I think I put in my title, instead of the Batman 2's main villain is Clayface, I just put villain. Because it's true. If Clayface, hypothetically, let's just assume he is actually in the sequel, it doesn't mean that he's going to be the main Rogues Gallery villain, similar to what I always use as an example in cases like this, like the front and center first movie's villain, Paul Dano's The Riddler. He could be a side, somewhat Rogues Gallery villain, possibly utilized or working with other characters, whether that's for Penguin or maybe another character who could be the main villain. Let's just say Hush, utilizing Clayface's talents. Let's put it that way, because, that's when we get into the whole powers and abilities or lack thereof. So yeah, it doesn't mean that he's the main villain. That's if he's even in it at all. Could be a side villain, could be still very crucial. So we're going to have to wait and see there. But there is actually nothing out there at all indicating, just for those of you who don't know, that Clayface is going to be a main villain, but just rather described as a big addition to the Matt Reeves' The Batman 2. But again, cycling back to them saying it remains to be seen whether the Clayface talk belongs to the DC Gods and Monsters, James Gunn stuff, or the Batman Part 2. So question number 2 is from Imran Peter Ali saying, "Hey Boba, hope all is well." Thank you, man. Same to you. Just wanted to know how Clayface's looks and abilities could be grounded to fit this version of Batman. We know there is a bit of fantasy in this version, but Clayface may be a bit too much. So yeah, this goes back, and I know this always starts some, I don't know if I want to quite call it controversial discourse, but people have, I would say, fundamental differences in the way they feel like Matt Reeves could explore this. Now, I've already beaten a dead horse, as they say, with regards to saying that I do believe that Matt Reeves, as he says himself, will ground the fantastical villains within reality. But that doesn't mean, it's exactly, I think people always say, we've already seen that with Nolan's, but there's still vast, distinct differences between Nolan's Batman, which was hyper-realistic, to that of Matt Reeves's. Matt Reeves is still very comics faithful, even more so, way more so, I would say, than Nolan's Batman, as much as I love those movies, and they get a lot of things really right and awesome, and it's a really cool take. The comparisons are just, I think, a bit too one note. It's not that black and white to compare it to that of Nolan's when you discuss the realistic comparisons to that of Nolan's and Matt Reeves's Batman. A lot of people also say grounded doesn't necessarily mean realistic. I agree with you, but what I mean by when I say grounded is like grounded within reality. As Matt Reeves says, how can we take that and make it work here? Even saying things like, I love that fantastical side of Batman, but this iteration, obviously, to me, while being very comics faithful, and it most certainly is, but I don't think this one necessarily, it doesn't lean into the fantastical. So that's why I always say grounded into reality, because if you just say grounded alone, you can have a fantastical villain in the movie that's still grounded but still blowing up the fantastical aspects. I don't believe, without repeating myself too much, that Reeves will do that. So yes, you may fundamentally disagree with me because people still think that this can happen, and fair enough. I guess we're going to ultimately have to wait to see who's right or wrong here if that did happen, and even if Clayface doesn't happen, we'll still get that answer with another Rogues Gallery member, whether that's Freeze, Poison Ivy, or let's just say another fantastical villain. But I don't believe that Clayface would be the morphing mud monster version. So Imran asking, just wanted to know how Clayface's looks and abilities could be grounded to fit this version. And this is also something I wanted to acknowledge. Just because Matt Reeves, regards this as very comics faithful, but they don't lean into the fantastical here, it doesn't mean that they can't walk the line of fantastical. So I've said before, and this is something I just don't think so many people are aware of, despite me talking about it, and I do think it's getting out there a little bit more, especially with the recent Clayface discourse going on with the reports out there from major trades, like such as Deadline saying this, that the Golden Age Clayface, the original Clayface, wasn't the mud morphing monster. It's just that the most popular version of Clayface became that. And yeah, that's fair enough. A lot of Golden Age villains became something new entirely. They evolved into something else. And sometimes, people just look at the Golden Age version and they're just like, yeah, that's not nearly as cool. And that's fair enough. I love the mud morphing version of Clayface as well. But I will say that the Golden Age original version is very, very, suitable for that of the epic crime saga, words explained by Matt Reeves, that his Batman trilogy is going to be. And that character was a serial killer. And again, this is where, I can spiral down a different avenue saying, oh, another serial killer. I don't think it would be, again, as black and white as that. Of course, what I mean is influenced by, so they're not going to carbon copy the Golden Age Clayface. But the influence, I do believe, will be something similar there. He's a man who literally wore a Clayface mask, and that's how, the idea of that is he could blend in, look different, and not actually look like his Basil Carlos self. So just take those few character attributes and traits from the Golden Age Clayface, and that is what I think Matt Reeves would do if we're getting Clayface versus that of like the mud monster. But the thing is, remember the walking the line of fantastical comment I made a minute ago. They could still give the Clayface in the Batman Part 2 unrealistic ways to accomplish what he does to look different, to be Clayface, in a way that isn't quite the mud morphing blob monster, but in a way, as I've said, like a Mission Impossible mask, where they actually do have another actor's face on there, but they peel it off and then it's like Tom Cruise again or something like that. That actually isn't really realistic, but I do think, there's examples out there like him being an ex-actor or something like that in that industry makes him perhaps this prosthetics expert to the point of maybe using some kind of clay substance. There's so many ideas you could go down there, which still unwinds the fantastical, grounds it a bit in reality, doesn't make it too fantastical, but doesn't make it too like, oh, there's absolutely nothing to this other than a serial killer just wearing like a different mask, if you know what I mean. So that is like a very rough overview of how in this version Clayface would use those abilities, but I'm sure we are going to explore this in subsequent questions we're going to get into in this video, because a few of you do have some very good ideas there, you know, getting into the very creepy body horror type of thing, maybe utilizing hush and whatnot in ways that Clayface could be done. So up next from Chris Guyton, do you think aspects of Preston Payne's Clayface could be incorporated into this iteration? For example, I could see Payne's disease being utilized for the Clayface, I think you mean say concept or conceit. It could be a happy medium, golden age Basil Carlo who just wears a mask and thus would disappoint a lot of hardcore fans. And yeah, that seems to be the consensus among a lot of people. Some people do love it, but a lot of people, again, as I said, they just see Clayface and know one version, when actually the OG version is what you just said, who wears a mask and, you know, thus maybe might disappoint a lot of people thinking that Matt Reeves was going to go full-on fantastical with this news being reported. And the Matt Hagen version, who's probably too fantastical for Reeves' universe. Preston Payne's backstory is extremely gothic and tragic as well. So yeah, I would say that the Preston Payne version, you know, similar also to Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth. There's so many ways, despite me going on about Matt Reeves unwinding the fantastical, and again, as he said here, but what would be interesting to him would be to try and unwind that fantastical and see, well, how could we make that work here? There's a massive variety of things that he could do. So yeah, like a kind of skin disease situation. Again, Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on a Serious Earth, in where he's got that skin disease, and if he touches you, it can also affect you and his skin. It's just, this is what I mean by the body horror aspect. So even though, let's again assume this was and is literally happening, it might not be the blob monster you want, but Matt Reeves and the tone of this world, the body horror aspect that they could go with here, and he could still use things like, as I said, could be a very big master and, you know, very talented prosthetics artist, so he can alter his look in walking the line of fantastical ways, where it's grounded in a way that how can we make that work here, as Matt Reeves says. So like, it might not be so believable, but it's using realistic properties where even though we can't necessarily achieve that look in real life, he could maybe actually make himself look a bit different. Maybe he applies this substance like Renew or whatever to his face to kind of cloak the skin disease that he has in the way that Chris is saying here, like Preston Payne's Clayface. I don't think like Preston Payne, though, it would get to the point where after, you know, doing some experiments on himself, he literally turns into quite a melting creature to the point of needing to be in this somewhat hazmat-y-esque suit. But they could certainly incorporate some aspects of that, not necessarily where it's literally melting, but something, again, going back to the body horror, very disturbing element, where it is very, very, very creepy, and still kind of true to the character, even though a lot of people, I just don't think, like to acknowledge that. It's not wrong. It is very true to the character. There's multiple versions that don't involve being a literal morphing massive blob monster. There's like the Basil Carlo Golden Age version. There's again Preston Payne, multiple takes of something like that with A Serious House on a Serious Earth. I think just a lot of people forget about that and they see one thing. So if Matt Reeves does anything different, they're like, oh, screw this kind of thing. And part of me does get it, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't really, really be freaking awesome. And guess what? Comics accurate in many ways than I think a lot of people are giving it credit for. Plus, even if they did that, he might not be the actual main villain. As I've said before as well, I do think the way more fantastical adaptations of the fantastical characters will be reserved for James Gunn's DC universe. Now, I'm not saying Batman Brave and the Bold with Damian Wayne's going to get into like a blob monster Clayface, but if we do see that Batman take on various rogues gallery villains throughout the DCU, because, you know, yeah, we've got Brave and the Bold, and who knows what villain's going to pop up in that, but as they go down the line and we see Batman more in the 2 chapters of the 10-year DCU, I'm sure we will see something, and I'm just saying the very comic accurate, faithful version will be reserved in those. But that doesn't mean that you can't do comic accuracy in the Batman as well. It just might not be your preference. Like, there's a couple of different lenses here. Do you want this pair of glasses or this pair of glasses? Both are very relevant and accurate to the source material. And the irony being, the OG Clayface is the one that a lot of people are criticizing for not being remotely accurate when they actually couldn't be more wrong. And I don't want to come across as speaking down to people there. I'm just trying to make it known that people have different preferences, and not to confuse preferences with, somewhat dictating this is actually how it is. So I do think as well it could be a similar situation to the Riddler where, Riddler is maybe a lot more easier to digest for those who expected a certain version of the Riddler, but when we had him based on the Zodiac Killer, he wasn't wearing a top hat, having a Riddler cane and stuff. A lot of people were just like, WTF. And then when they saw the movie, they were like, damn, that is actually really cool. So it's the same thing with Clayface here. They can still be very comic accurate, get into all of these different sectors, and Matt Reeves, I'm sure, if this is done, would draw something so interesting as per what Chris is saying here with different versions and kind of, put it into one thing and possibly based maybe on something in real life as well. And we're about to get into a question with that and just make it this, really fit the epic crime saga that the Batman trilogy is all about. So up next is a really cool question from Ferris that I think is what makes Clayface, if he's used, a very, very intriguing villain. So how could Clayface, maybe being in the film, influence Bruce's character arc and emotional journey from the already great progress he experienced in the first film, since Matt Reeves said that would be the main focus of his movies? And yeah, he's gone on quite a lot about he always wants to focus on character, the emotional core of that, the somewhat trauma, the growth there, and how can Clayface be used to, if he is used to help propel Bruce forward in this journey. And the cool thing about Clayface, if he is used, I think one of the main things is that, as per what a lot of us are expecting in the second movie, is that it'll be used to help kind of propel the Bruce Wayne identity side of things. Now, as for exactly how that could go down, there's so many different ways. Some people like to say, oh, could he frame Bruce Wayne, or could something be done there? Could he be working in conjunction with Hush? And that's how the theme of identity could be incorporated even more. No matter what, a lot of us are aware that probably in the second movie after Bruce Wayne, and a lot of people criticize this, and I don't understand why, because that's the whole point. Bruce in Batman Year 2 with Matt Reeves, he's 24/7 Batman. He doesn't really operate as Bruce Wayne much, but that's a part of the journey. By the end of the first movie, he was kind of forced to be Bruce Wayne a little bit more, but as we go throughout the movies, especially with the growth that he's experienced, it makes sense for Bruce Wayne to come out of his shell. I don't think he's going to go full-on playboy or anything like that, but certainly coming out of the shell a little bit more. There's certainly opportunities with this, with philanthropy, Gotham flooding and stuff. I think a lot of us expect some low-key things there, but also with Bruce Wayne, as what we've discussed in recent videos in the discussion series, is that don't forget that Bruce Wayne may have got some clarification about how, Thomas Wayne didn't kill Edward Elliot, and all of this stuff, but the public don't know any of that, so they might look at the Waynes in like a whole different light right now. This guy who never comes out of his penthouse, now the Riddler exposed this video to Gotham that, Thomas Wayne worked with Falcone, there was a big cover-up, a hush money payment, it looks really bad. So there's almost this natural seed for Bruce Wayne. I'm not sure if he's gonna try and clear his parents' name or anything like that, but there's a lot of public, probably, conversation about the Wayne name. So I do expect things like that to be tackled, and who knows how that could be, involved with a villain like Clayface. And a lot of people attribute to this would work really well with Hush. Like, what if there's some more smearing or something like that going on with maybe the impersonation of Bruce Wayne? And there's all kinds of things, but also, obviously, in of himself, the identity aspect is very core to Clayface 2, and as per what Matt Reeves has said, he wanted to lean into the psychological, emotional core for each of the characters. Each one of them has had a trauma, especially the Rogues Gallery villains that made them go down the path they've gone down, from Joker to Paul Dano in the first movie. Obviously, there's so much backstory there. So what could they do with Clayface if he's being done? I know I keep saying that, but I think it's important because I don't want to pretend like this is a concrete fact right now. But certainly, with the theme of identity being a natural assumption for us with Bruce Wayne in the second movie. Having a mirror to that with a villain, whether that's Clayface or Hush or both of them, who knows, seems like it really does make a lot of sense with the fact that these villains also kind of live and breathe identity and changes in identity. So I would love to know what you guys think about that. How do you think that could be expanded? How do you think that could be used in the second movie? So up next from Jackson Durr saying, hey Boba, given that Matt Reeves' Batman story focuses more on the idea of how to bring the traditionally fantastical into a practical and realistic world, what's the most theatrical and fantasy-like Batman villain you can think of? And do you think that Matt Reeves could twist it into his universe? So, I know a lot of people, pick and choose with this, but I do have a Batman Rogues Gallery adaptation series. I know I'm taking ages to come out with episode 2. I do apologize about that, but it is coming. And my belief is that pretty much most of them can be adapted, whether that's Poison Ivy, Mr. Freeze, Clayface, into how to unwind that and make it work. Here, still walking the line of fantastical in ways that isn't necessarily grounded identical to our world, but still working and being very faithful, albeit I know some people will say, well, if you do Poison Ivy without the freaking powers conjuring up vines, that's not accurate. I disagree. You can still do it. It might not be your preference. That whole discussion there. So I do think Ivy can work. Clayface, Freeze, you name it. Scarecrow, that's not even fantastical. That's literally drugs, hallucinogenics. Very, 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 very believable there. But there is one or two where I'm just kind of like, for example, Man-Bat. I don't think you're going to have like a Morbius type literal vampire man flying around in Gotham, realistically with wings. That's the one where I think if you grounded it in the ways that I have ideas for Clayface, Ivy, and Freeze and whatnot, it just really it just doesn't seem like it would be that character, which may sound contradictive to what I've just said, but trust me, you can do Ivy in ways that's faithful, you can do Freeze in ways that's faithful, but Man-Bat is like literally a flying Man-Bat. Now, I know a lot of people have ideas with, for example, maybe if somebody got dosed with Scarecrow's fear toxin. That is one way you could see Man-Bat, but it's almost like a cop-out, if you know what I mean, if that's the only way you were to ever do Man-Bat in one of the movies. So do you see what I mean? The reason why Man-Bat just doesn't really work for me and how I couldn't see it being twisted into this universe is because, yeah, you guys know who Man-Bat is. So yeah, that's where that would be a version of Reeves's films where he actually does just straight up adapt them into fantastical versions of themselves. But to kind of answer your question, what's the most theatrical and fantasy-like Batman villain you can think of, and do you think Matt Reeves could twist it into his universe? I think the character that would take the cake there would probably be Poison Ivy. I guess maybe Miss Freeze. Obviously, there's a lot of fantastical Rogues Gallery Batman villains, but Poison Ivy in the comics' actual source material version, as I've always said, cast hand out, vines burst through the floor. But the thing is, in terms of her form, she normally looks like that of a humanoid person. So you can still be Poison Ivy, have her agenda, her motives, even some, not abilities, but her talents that she uses in her mission that would work in the movie. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, but Clayface doesn't always keep his form. But that's where I give you the answer of, yeah, but that's not the form I'm on about. I'm talking about more or less the Golden Age influence. So that's why Clayface can still work, still with, as I've said, the properties and uses of his talents through makeup or masks and things like that, even though that's kind of boring to a lot of people. But yeah, I think I would have to say Poison Ivy could easily be adapted. But the thing is, probably just in ways that a lot of people would say, but that's not Poison Ivy if you do that kind of thing. But I do beg to differ there. Like, there's certainly interesting things they can do, and my episode 2 on the Rogues Gallery adaptation series is all about Ivy. So keep an eye out for that. Coming to you sometime soon. Hopefully. So up next from Jay Shorey 253 here, talking about ways to somewhat do these villains and do Clayface. Matt Reeves is a big fan of looking back, for example, The Man Who Laughs with Joker, or the Zodiac Killer with Riddler. Jay Shorey says, for Clayface, I kind of have an idea of who he can take a bit of inspiration from. Like the Riddler taking inspirations from the Zodiac Killer, I kind of feel like Clayface could take a bit of inspiration from the real-life murderer Ed Gein. I think that's how you say his name. Though I'd probably admit it might be too dark for the film, as the idea I had for Basil Karlo, Clayface, to cut his victim's face/skin off. and he can wear them to blend in whenever he's going out into the streets of Gotham. Again, that might be a bit too dark for a Batman film, but I still feel like that Ed Gein can somehow have a bit of an impression for this version of Clayface. What do you think about this, and do you have any other killers that can have inspiration for Clayface? Love your videos, BobaTalks. Keep up the awesome work. Thank you, man. And after looking up this real-life murderer, yeah, that is certainly something. For example, on the wiki page, yeah, maybe a bit too much information here. After searching the house, the authorities found whole human bones and fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin. But as you go down the list, there's other things like skulls on his bedposts, masks made from skin of female heads, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Now, it is interesting to consider because I do think that might be a bit too far for the movie to go in terms of concept, because, you know, they want to keep it PG-13. In the UK, it was a 15, but, like, you know, they didn't want that to happen. In America, it wasn't the case. It wasn't R-rated or anything like that. Not that it's R-rated being 15, but you get what I'm saying. Now, wearing the literal skin of victim's face, you know, that would be a very disturbing approach, going along the very crime-operated aspect of these movies, though. And if they did do Clayface, I do think it could be something very creepy like this. I don't think it would necessarily be exactly like this where you literally see it, but I can imagine instead of like cutting the actual skin off, Clayface could maybe kill people and have victims and mold the face, kind of like how makeup artists actually have an actor kind of sit there for like 4 hours and they have to like barely breathe through the nose holes. This goes back to the whole makeup, prosthetics artist and talent that Clayface could have, going back to the golden age influences. Instead of just having a simple clay mask, to adapt that into this movie to kind of still give him the Clayface aspect to him, he could mold the faces from the victims, makes a really, 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 really convincing mask. And we know that can be done with the whole, how can we take that and make it work here? Look at Colin Farrell. He's literally had that same makeup artist approach by Mike Marino, where he has a whole face put onto him and it makes him look completely and utterly different. So you might see where I'm going there. He does that, maybe takes a mold instead of literally cutting off the face, and he has the ability to make him look completely different from what he did before. And that is very true to the vein of Clayface, in a way that I can imagine Matt Reeves genuinely actually making that work in his version. Once again, they can make it even more hyper-realistic with, instead of actually using the Mike Marino penguin makeup approach, they could use some kind of substance again in the universe logic of something like Reno, where he has a special property that makes it look even more convincing. If they have the ability to do that and convince you that Colin Farrell isn't really under that makeup, they can most certainly do that in universe with someone like Basil Karlo or whatever version of Clayface that you want to make himself look different. So the thing is, I don't really have any examples of other killers because I actually really like the one that you listed here. It's just to kind of maybe wind down the like really horrific side of that. He can still kill people, but instead of cutting off their face, I know I'm saying it again, he has the body there and he can like really get to work with taking a mold of their face, and then once he's done that, he can literally steal their identity. But maybe there'd be some loopholes there or plot holes where it's like, is that person reported missing, or, you know, what's going on with them? So if he goes out looking like them, won't that kind of be suspicious? I'm sure when writing it, they would kind of work out the kinks there and just like perfectly craft how to make it believable. But yeah, I really love this idea, and it just goes into the whole kind of very body horror aspect of it, the way he actually comes up with these new faces that's true to the Golden Age version, but just doesn't necessarily go unrealistic to the point of, you know, actually stretching the skin and being completely different. But you could imagine how creepy it is if he like tore off the face. Like, imagine Colin Farrell actually like taking his makeup and tearing it off, and then somebody entirely different just being underneath. It's ways like that in where Clayface can really thrive in this world, but some people might just be like, that's lame compared to the blob morphing monster version. And fair enough if you do think that, but really take this idea and approach it in all the kind of crime Batman saga-esque ways, the kind of body horror, really freaky element, the way this is relevant to the story, the theme of maybe identity, and I do think that they could cook something really cool there. And up next from Moby, this is what I was kind of mentioning earlier. I have a feeling that Clayface will work alongside Hush so that they can frame Bruce Wayne. This will also make the movie center more around Bruce Wayne than Batman, causing Bruce to develop his persona. And yeah, I mean, who knows? Like, the thing is, a lot of people keep talking about Hush because when asked, you know, what villains that Matt Reeves could maybe do in a future movie, he replied that Hush is one of his favorites. He did say that, like, don't think that means I'm going to do it, but if he gets the opportunity to do that, that would be really cool. And you could definitely tie that into the events of the first movie. And a way of kind of doing Hush, you could have him work with Clayface. This is where Clayface, and maybe the idea of him not necessarily being a main villain, but more of a side villain, gets introduced. Maybe he can help assist Hush with his, you know, agenda and what he wants to do from the news of the fact that Thomas Wayne was responsible for killing his father, even though that's not the case. As I said, maybe that's what the public thinks. He finds out about this, and, you know, ever since the first movie, you could argue that he's been cooking something up. Clayface could be hired, and he could be used to kind of incorporate the Hush aspects into the Clayface aspects and deliver us a story about this identity that really does involve Bruce Wayne a lot more. I do still think we're going to get Batman a lot in the second movie, but given the natural growth and development and the process that we went through in that first movie, we will, as I've said, see Bruce Wayne a little bit more, and this could cause a lot of problems for that side of him and really kind of not force but bring out that character into the story, the main plot of the Batman Part 2 in a very relevant way. Up next from Rio McRae saying, "Hey Boba, I wanted to ask, if Clayface isn't the big bad of the Batman Part 2, do you think it's possible for someone like Bane to be the big bad of the movie? He makes a lot of sense to use villain-wise, and he could be hired to kill the Bat by Penguin or Maroni, but actually have his own sinister reasons for being in Gotham." Great videos, by the way. Thank you. So with Bane, I've always said this, I don't know if he would necessarily be like the Batman 2's villain or Part 3. There's a lot of villains that might be left out because there's, you know, he has to pick and choose. We've had Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, but I've always said, you know, again, going back to these Nolan comparisons, one way I can kind of separate Nolan from Reeves here is that whereas Nolan didn't use Venom or anything like that with Tom Hardy's Bane, I do 100% believe that Reeves would use Venom. Now, the thing is, and this goes back to me saying walking the line of fantastical, he still would, you know, play with it a little bit, but not go crazy. So I don't think if Bane used, for example, Venom in the second movie, if he was the villain, once he uses Venom, it blows his muscles up. He just, you know, starts developing, you know, balloons there. I don't think that would be the case. But just like how a lot of people thought that the adrenaline that Batman injected into himself when he was about to save Selina and he went kind of roided up crazy, they thought that was Venom. It isn't. It is adrenaline. That would be kind of the property or the result of what would happen if Bane was used in Reeves' trilogy. But more so, obviously, it wouldn't just be the adrenaline. But you see what I mean? I don't think Reeves would completely, if he did Bane, neglect Venom. There would probably be some kind of Wayne Enterprises kind of R&D department kind of drug that maybe he gets a hold of. Who knows how, like, Venom would be developed, you know, insert theory here. But Bane would inject it into himself. He would become, you know, maybe it would enhance reflexes, even borderline strength. It would have, you know, just like how Bruce went crazy and it allowed him to stand back up even though his ribs were probably broken. It gave him the adrenaline to get over there and save Selina. Now imagine like a modified version of adrenaline that gave you some properties but not unrealistic ones, where it gave you, again, big balloon muscles. So that's how I imagine how Bane would work. He would have Venom, unlike Nolan's version. It wouldn't do crazy fantastical things that, you know, aren't realistic to actually stretch your skin, build up your muscles within seconds, but it would give him a serious edge over another human in combat who isn't using that same drug. But I kind of went off on a tangent there because you're just more asking, do you think it's possible for someone like Bane to be the big bad? It is possible, but but I don't know if he would do that. You know, my evidence for it isn't really evidence because, you know, you could say, but Bane was done in the previous trilogy, but so was Joker, and I'm sure we're going to see Barry Keoghan's Joker again at some point. You know, so was Scarecrow. A lot of people like to say, but we've seen Scarecrow so much, but Killian was a very minor role in that first movie, kind of just facilitating the League of Shadows and their plan. So really, just because a villain's been used in the Nolan trilogy doesn't mean that they can't be incorporated somehow into the Reeves trilogy. So I kind of end this on the fact that it is possible. I 100% believe he's one of the, you know, arguably fantastical villains. And what I mean by fantastical there is the unbelievable aspects of the Venom drug blowing up balloon level muscles. But the question is, will Reeves choose him? Like, I genuinely don't know, but I would love to see that in a way because it would present way more of a physical challenge for Robert Pattinson's Batman. I do believe it's always going to be heavy detective-driven kind of noir-focused stuff we're going to see in these movies, but I think a lot of us do want to see a bit more action from Batman in one of these movies that revolves around Batman being a bit more physical, maybe in a showdown with a villain, like Mr. Freeze would be a good example there, having a bit more of a protective suit, Bane actually having like hyper-modified adrenaline venom stuff, so it gives him a massive edge, but we're ultimately going to have to wait and see. He could pick Hush, he could pick Clayface, he could pick Scarecrow, he could pick... like, who knows? But as I said in an earlier question, I believe, honestly, over 3/4 of the Batman Rogues Gallery villains, fantastical or not, can be adapted. And Bane is easily one of them. I keep seeing comments saying, oh, Bane's way too fantastical with Venom. No. He can be used. It might not be in the preference of him being a hulking monster, but it can definitely give him an edge that would be, I think, a lot more enjoyable and comics faithful compared to that of The Dark Knight Rises Tom Hardy Bane. But guys, after rambling a lot about Clayface and villains and fantasticalness, I would just love to know your thoughts now on what we've talked about today. What do you believe about Clayface yourself? Bearing in mind that this isn't a guaranteed thing, but this is the fun of this series. You know, if it was to happen, what do you think about what I've said and what people have submitted for today's questions? How do you think that could be done? What do you think about the theme of identity? What do you think about, you know, walking the line of fantastical in terms of an approach? For example, my suggestion about the makeup mold, maybe killing a victim, not necessarily cutting off the face, but making a mold like Mike Marino's makeup for Colin Farrell's face to give him the Oz look, and maybe that could be used. Maybe working with another villain. Like, there's so many things that we covered, so let me know your influences, your ideas down in the comments below, and of course, you know, tackling other fantastical villains as well, as we threw a little bit of that in there today. If you got this far in the video, I just really appreciate a like. It helps the channel out so much, so thank you if you have done that. Definitely subscribe if you want to stay up to date with more videos like this, especially when we get more news on the Batman. We do break it down here quite in depth, so if you like this, I'm sure you will like other videos on the channel. But honestly, just thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you, Bat Family, in the next video. Goodbye.